Paolo adjusted the dials on the cockpit panel, the familiar hum of the engines reverberating through the cramped space. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the horizon, but it did little to brighten his mood. He stared out at the sprawling landscape below, patches of fields and clusters of towns, but his mind was far away, lost in the regrets of the last decade. The weight of his choices pressed heavily on his shoulders, filling him with an emptiness that no amount of flying could erase. Flight 732, you are cleared for takeoff. The radio crackled, pulling him abruptly from his thoughts. He gave a brief nod to his co-pilot, Sarah, a young woman whose focused expression belied her excitement. New to the job, Sarah's enthusiasm reminded Paolo of a time when he had felt the same thrill. Now, that spark had long since faded, drained by years of routine. Today, though, felt different. Today, he wasn't just flying passengers. He was flying with ghosts of his past. As he completed the final pre-flight checks, a wave of nostalgia caught him off guard. Clara and Anna flashed into his mind. His ex-wife and daughter, the life he had walked away from 10 years ago. Laughter, family dinners, shared dreams. They all resurfaced, followed by a sharp stab of regret. He had abandoned them, thinking he was chasing freedom, but all he had found was isolation. "Captain, everything's set," Sarah announced, her voice breaking through his memories. He offered her a tight smile, grateful for the distraction, though it did nothing to loosen the knot tightening in his stomach. There was a storm brewing inside him, one he had tried to ignore for too long. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and Paolo focused on the task at hand. But his thoughts kept wandering back to Clara. How was she now? How had she coped with his absence? Those questions hung over him like shadows, darkening the already cramped cockpit. As the aircraft lifted off, Paolo felt a jolt, not from turbulence but from the painful realization that he had not only abandoned his family, but also any chance of making things right. He gripped the controls harder, trying to steady his runaway thoughts. Then, out of the corner of his eye, something caught his attention. A familiar figure, boarding the plane. His heart nearly stopped. It was Clara. Her face carried a mixture of determination and unease, but beside her stood Anna, a vibrant, wide-eyed 10-year-old who had grown up without him. Paolo's breath caught in his throat. Clara looked just as beautiful as the day he had left, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. But her expression was heavy, burdened by the years of struggle without him. Anna, on the other hand, was the spitting image of her mother, with a mischievous spark in her eyes that reminded Paolo of himself. "Look, Mom, we're going to fly." Anna's voice rang out, brimming with joy. Clara smiled down at her, but Paolo could see the flicker of sadness behind that smile, a shadow of all the things left unsaid between them. Hey everyone! If you enjoy watching our videos, help us by subscribing to our channel. It's really important, and that way you support us. Now, let's get into the video. Everything okay? Sarah asked, noticing his sudden distraction. "Yeah, just someone I know," Paolo muttered, forcing his gaze back to the cockpit controls. But the emotions churning inside him were harder to control. He wanted to go to them, say something, anything, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead, he focused on the steady roar of the engines, hoping it would drown out the turmoil inside him. As the plane ascended, Paolo stole glances toward Clara and Anna. The bond between them was undeniable. Clara leaned down to whisper something in Anna's ear, and the girl burst into a fit of laughter, a joyful sound that cut through Paolo like a knife, reminding him of the happiness he had once been part of, the happiness he had given up. Along with the memories came a wave of jealousy. He thought of Lucas, Clara's new husband, the man now sharing the life Paolo had abandoned. He had missed so much: birthdays, milestones, the simple daily joys of watching his daughter grow. He had left behind not just a family, but a future. "Just fly the plane, Paolo," he muttered under his breath, trying to shake off the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. But as he caught a glimpse of Clara's smile across the cabin, he knew this flight would be far from routine. The air between them was thick with unresolved pain, and there was no escaping it, not at 30,000 feet. The plane had reached cruising altitude when a sudden commotion erupted from the back of the cabin. The calm atmosphere shattered as the urgent voice of a flight attendant came over the intercom. "We have a medical emergency. A passenger is going into labor. We need assistance immediately." Paolo exchanged a glance with his co-pilot, Mark, a young man who had only just started flying with him. Alarm flickered in Mark's eyes, but Paolo's instincts took over. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through him. He unbuckled his harness and stood up. "Let's clear a path to the back of the plane." As he moved swiftly through the aisle, his eyes caught Clara's again. She held Anna close, her face a mix of concern and fear. Paolo's heart wrenched at the sight of them, but there was no time to linger in the past. He had to focus on the emergency at hand. At the back of the plane, a young woman lay hunched over in pain, surrounded by a few panicked passengers trying to help but unsure of what to do. "Step back, please," Paolo commanded, his authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to give her space." Out of nowhere, Clara appeared beside him. "I'm a nurse," she said, stepping forward with calm determination. "Let me help." For a moment, Paolo could only stare. Clara had always been strong, but seeing her like this, capable, composed, made his chest tighten with a mixture of admiration and regret. She hadn't just survived without him, she had thrived. "Okay," Paolo said, forcing his tone to remain professional. "We need to get her into a more comfortable position. Can you check her vitals?" Clara nodded, her hands moving swiftly and confidently as she assessed the situation. For a brief second, their eyes met, and in that glance, Paolo felt time collapse. The years of distance between them seemed to vanish, replaced by the connection they once shared. But the weight of their unresolved past still loomed. "We'll need towels and a blanket," Paolo called over his shoulder to Mark, who had been standing by helplessly. And quickly. Clara, meanwhile, had taken full control of the situation. Her voice was soothing as she spoke to the laboring woman. "You're doing great. Just breathe. We're here to help you." Paolo stepped back slightly, letting Clara work. He couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for her calmness, her competence. It was everything he had once loved about her. Watching her now, in the midst of this crisis, he felt a pang of loss deeper than any he had known. As Clara continued to guide the terrified mother through her contractions, Paolo sensed a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The chaos that had briefly taken hold of the passengers began to fade, their attention now fixed on the unfolding drama at the back of the plane. It was a stark reminder of life's fragility, and for the first time in a long while, Paolo felt a sense of purpose, something that had eluded him for years. "Paolo," Clara's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and focused. "The baby is coming. I need you here with me." Without hesitation, he moved closer, instinctively positioning himself at Clara's side. "Okay, I'm here," he replied, his voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside him. Together, they worked to support the laboring mother, guiding her through the final push. Moments later, the piercing cry of a newborn filled the air. A surge of exhilaration and relief rushed through Paolo, overpowering the tension that had knotted his chest for so long. "It's a girl," Clara announced, her voice triumphant, a brief smile lighting her face. The new mother sobbed with joy, and for the first time in years, Paolo found himself smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile. In that fleeting moment, the weight of the past seemed to dissolve, replaced by the shared triumph of bringing new life into the world. The pain and regret that had haunted him felt distant, almost irrelevant. "You did great, Mom," Paolo said, beaming at the new mother. But as he turned toward Clara, their eyes locked. There was a brief, silent exchange between them, a wordless acknowledgement of what they had just achieved together. For a moment, the warmth of their old connection flickered back to life. But as the initial thrill of the moment passed, the reality of their lost years came rushing back. Clara's smile faltered, her eyes darkening with unspoken emotion. She broke their gaze, turning away from him. "We should get the baby to her mother," Clara murmured, her voice thick with feeling. Paolo understood. For just a moment, they had stepped back into each other's worlds, but the reality of the distance between them loomed large, a chasm too vast to cross so easily. "We did good," Paolo said quietly, almost to himself. Clara nodded, but the warmth that had briefly brightened her gaze was gone. The moment had passed, and as they moved away from the new family, Paolo felt the gap between them widening once more, echoing the years they could never recover. Later, Paolo stepped out of the cockpit, the low hum of the cabin sharply contrasting with the storm of emotions swirling inside him. The recent commotion had subsided, but his heart raced as he scanned the rows of passengers for Clara. He spotted her near the back, her brow furrowed as she helped a flight attendant calm a nervous passenger. For a brief moment, the sight of her, strong, focused, the woman he had once loved, brought a flood of memories rushing back. Joyful memories, painful ones. "Clara," he called softly, his voice barely rising above the murmurs in the cabin. She turned at the sound of his voice, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded neutrality. The tension between them was thick, like a storm cloud heavy with unsaid words. "Paolo," she replied coolly, crossing her arms. "Is everything okay up front?" "Yeah," he said, nodding, feeling the awkwardness settle in. "I just wanted to check in. You were great back there." He gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane, his voice softening. "You were amazing." Clara's lips twitched in a brief, almost involuntary smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks. It's been a while since I've had to step in like that." She paused, the silence between them stretching, heavy with unspoken history. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Paolo admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, suddenly acutely aware of how surreal this moment felt. "I thought I'd left all of this behind." Clara's eyes hardened. "You did leave it behind, Paolo. You walked away 10 years ago." The words hit him like a punch, but he knew she was right. "I know," he said, his voice thick with remorse. "I've thought about it every day since. I didn't have the courage to face my responsibilities then, and I regret that more than you can imagine." "Regret doesn't change anything," Clara snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "You can't just waltz back into our lives and pretend everything's fine. Anna has a father now." The mention of Lucas stung more than Paolo cared to admit. He had seen Lucas with Anna during boarding, their easy laughter, the playful banter. It was everything Paolo had forfeited. "I know he's been there for you both," Paolo said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I need to understand. I need to know how you've been." Clara's expression softened, but only slightly. "We've managed," she said, her voice calmer now, though still tinged with the weight of the past. "Lucas has been a wonderful partner, a wonderful father. Anna adores him." Her gaze faltered for a second, a brief flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. "But it hasn't been easy. I've had to raise Anna with the knowledge that her biological father chose to leave. I've had to explain your absence in a way that wouldn't hurt her. Does she know about me?" Paolo's heart pounded at the thought. He had been so close to her this entire time, yet so far away. "Not really," Clara admitted, her voice tinged with sadness. "I've protected her from that pain. I didn't want her to feel like she wasn't enough for you." The guilt hit him like a tidal wave. "I thought staying away was the best thing for you both, but I see now it only caused more pain. What if I want to be part of her life now?" Clara's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. "It's not that simple, Paolo. You can't just come back after all this time and expect to play a role in her life. It's not fair to her, or to Lucas." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I don't want to intrude. I never wanted to lose her. I didn't know how to be a father then, and I'm not sure I do now," he admitted, his voice faltering. "You still don't," Clara said softly, but firmly. "Anna has a father. Lucas has been there for her every day. You missed so much." Paolo turned away, the ache in his chest deepening as he thought of all the moments he had missed. The first steps, the first words, the birthdays, the bedtime stories. "I know I can't change the past," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to be there now. I need to know her." Clara hesitated, her expression softening as she looked at him. "You need to think long and hard about this. It's not about you. It's about what's best for Anna." Paolo nodded, the gravity of her words sinking in. He understood now, more clearly than ever, the magnitude of his choices, the hurt they had caused, and the difficult road ahead if he hoped to make amends. But somewhere deep within him, a flicker of hope had been rekindled. Perhaps there was still a chance for redemption, even if it was far from guaranteed. Paolo returned to the cockpit, the steady hum of the engines doing little to calm his racing mind. His thoughts were a tangled mess of guilt, regret, and fragile hope. As he settled into his seat, he noticed something out of place in the pocket beside him. An envelope, slightly crumpled. He pulled it out and his breath caught in his throat. The label on the folder read, Anna's medical records. His hands trembled as he opened it, scanning the documents inside. Each word felt like a punch to the gut. His daughter, Anna, had a rare bone marrow disorder. She needed a transplant. Paolo's world tilted as he absorbed the information. He had left his family, missed her childhood, and now she was sick. Desperately sick. And he had never even known. There it was, the stark reality of Anna's situation. The treatments, the endless hospital visits, and the urgency of finding a bone marrow donor. The world outside the cockpit blurred as Paolo felt a tidal wave of guilt wash over him. He had been so consumed by his own regrets that he had never considered the struggles Clara and Anna might have been facing without him. And now, those struggles were right in front of him, more real than ever. Paolo. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. Clara had stepped closer, her eyes widening as she noticed the medical folder in his hands. What are you doing with that? His throat felt tight as he struggled to find words. I found it in the seat pocket. I didn't mean to pry, but I had to know. His voice was raw, a mixture of concern, confusion, and self-directed anger for being so out of touch with his daughter's life. Clara's expression shifted from surprise to sadness, the weight of it pulling her down as she stepped into the cockpit. I should have told you sooner, she said quietly, her voice edged with regret. Anna's condition? It's been hard. We've been managing, but it hasn't been easy. Paolo's chest constricted as he looked at her, a mix of helplessness and urgency in his eyes. What does she need? Is there anything I can do? The words rushed out, tinged with desperation. He hadn't been there for her, but now he was ready to do anything. Anything. Clara's gaze was torn, her hand brushing through her hair in a gesture that betrayed her own internal struggle. We've been looking for a bone marrow donor, she said softly. Lucas has been incredible. He's been there every step of the way, supporting us through this nightmare. Her voice broke slightly as she spoke. But it's hard, Paolo. I didn't want to burden you with this. Not after everything. Paolo felt a surge of conflicting emotions, guilt, anger at himself, but also a fierce determination rising within him. Clara, he said, his voice steadier now. I might be the only one who can help. If I'm a match, I want to do this. For Anna, I need to be there for her. Clara's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her gaze. It's not just about finding a match, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. It's about Anna's life. She has stability with Lucas. He's been her rock, and I don't want to upset that. I don't want to throw her world into chaos. Paolo's heart clenched. He could feel the weight of her words, but he couldn't let this chance slip away. But I'm her father, he insisted, his voice rising slightly with urgency. I have a right to be involved in her life, especially if she needs me. Clara took a step back, the tension between them palpable. You left, Paolo. Her voice was sharp, but beneath the anger, there was hurt. You walked away from us. Now you want to come back and be the hero? Life doesn't work like that. I know I screwed up, he said, his voice breaking with the weight of his remorse. But I can't just stand by and do nothing. If there's a chance I can help her, I have to take it. I need to take it. Silence settled between them, heavy and unresolved. Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she absorbed his words. This isn't just about you, Paolo, she whispered, her voice fragile. It's about Anna's life, her stability. She loves Lucas. He's been her father in every way that matters. Then let me be a part of it, Paolo pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. I'm not trying to replace Lucas. I just want to be there for her, to help. Clara's gaze drifted away, the weight of their shared history pulling at her. "You have no idea how much your absence hurt us," she said softly, her voice carrying years of pain. "I don't know if I can trust you with this." Her words hit him like a blow, the weight of his past mistakes crashing down. "I don't expect forgiveness," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't let fear keep me away anymore. I want to be there for Anna. I want to be her father. If you'll let me." Clara's eyes flickered with a mix of emotions: uncertainty, fear, and something like hope. The steady hum of the engines filled the silence between them, but for Paolo, the tension inside him was unbearable. He felt that flicker of hope, fragile and fleeting, intertwining with a deep fear that he could lose this last chance. Paolo stood at the back of the plane, his heart racing as the weight of his decisions settled heavily on him. The sound of the engines and the quiet chatter of the passengers faded into the background as his thoughts spiraled around the folder he had discovered. It felt like the walls of the aircraft were closing in on him, suffocating him with the realization of all he had lost. From a few rows ahead, he could see Clara sitting with Anna and Lucas. Clara's laughter, sweet and familiar, filled the air, though it was a sound that now struck a painful chord deep within him. Once, he had been part of that laughter. He remembered family dinners, the warmth of Clara's cooking, Anna's giggles filling their home. Now, all of that felt like a distant dream. He was an outsider, a ghost haunting the memories of what could have been. "Paolo." Clara's voice pulled him back to the present. She approached him, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He forced a smile, but it was weak, unconvincing. "Just thinking about Anna?" Clara's gaze was sharp, as if she could read the storm brewing inside him. "I know this is overwhelming, but Anna deserves to know the truth. She deserves to know her father." A lump formed in Paolo's throat. "I abandoned you both," he murmured, the guilt washing over him anew. "I can't just waltz back into her life as if nothing happened. It would be selfish." "Maybe," Clara conceded softly, "but Anna deserves to know her history. You're part of that, whether you like it or not." His eyes drifted to Anna, who was engrossed in her coloring book, completely unaware of the gravity of their conversation. "What if I'm not what she needs? What if I just cause more pain?" Clara took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have a chance, Paolo. A chance to be different, to show her who you really are. You could give her something I can't. Her father." The weight of her words hung between them, each one a reminder of the burden he carried. "Do you really think I can make a difference?" he asked, his voice trembling. "After everything?" "More than you know," Clara replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Anna is strong, but she needs all the strength she can get right now. And if you're her only hope for a donor, you could save her." Paolo clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He had been so focused on his guilt, his past mistakes, that he had failed to see the bigger picture. Anna was fighting a battle he hadn't even known about. "I want to help her," he said, his voice steady with newfound resolve. "I do, but I'm scared I'll hurt her even more." "Then let her decide," Clara urged gently. "Talk to her, Paolo. Show her who you are. It's not about us anymore. It's about what's best for Anna and her future." Paolo took a deep breath, his chest tight with emotion. "What if she hates me? What if she resents me for not being there?" Clara shook her head, her expression softening. "You won't know unless you try. Children, they're more understanding than we give them credit for." "She may feel hurt," Clara said, her voice steady but soft, "but she may also feel the love you have for her. Don't underestimate the power of a father's love, even one that comes late." Paolo's heart ached at the thought of Anna's potential pain. He closed his eyes for a moment, grappling with the overwhelming weight of the situation. "I need time to figure this out," he said finally, his voice uncertain but steady. Clara nodded, her tone softening. "Take your time, but don't take too long. We're all on this flight together, and there's time before we land. Just think about what could be, Paolo." As Clara returned to her seat, Paolo felt a flicker of resolve ignite within him. He wanted to be part of Anna's life. He wanted to be the father she deserved. But the path ahead was filled with challenges. He watched Clara and Lucas sitting together with their daughter, a family bound by love and struggle. It stirred something deep inside him, a longing to belong, to be forgiven, and perhaps to forgive himself. "Okay," he whispered to the empty air, as if saying it aloud would solidify his resolve. "I'll meet her." As the plane began its descent, a hum of conversation filled the cabin, mingling with the steady sound of the engines. Suddenly, the voice of the captain crackled over the intercom, tense with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a severe storm. For your safety, we will be returning to our departure airport. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." Anxiety rippled through the cabin, passengers glancing nervously at one another. Paolo looked toward Clara, who held Anna close, her face a mix of concern and reassurance. He could see the tension in her posture, the way she exchanged a quick look with Lucas, who sat protectively beside them. The moment crystallized Paolo's fears. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a confrontation with the life he had walked away from. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, reminding passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Paolo felt a knot forming in his stomach. The storm had given him more time he hadn't expected, and he knew he had to seize this moment. Taking a deep breath, he steeled himself and walked toward the back of the plane, where Anna sat, her curious eyes widening as he approached. "Hi, Anna," he said softly, doing his best to keep his voice steady. "I'm your father." Anna blinked at him, her small face filled with confusion. "My father?" she echoed, tilting her head. "But I thought Lucas was my dad." Paolo's heart raced, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. "I know it's confusing," he said, kneeling beside her seat. I left a long time ago, before you were old enough to remember. But I'm here now. I want to get to know you." Anna's brow furrowed as she tried to understand. "Why did you leave?" she asked, her voice so innocent, yet the question cut through him like a blade. Paolo hesitated, the truth caught in his throat. "I was scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I made mistakes. I thought it would be better for you and your mom if I stayed away. But I was wrong." Lucas, who had been watching the interaction, stood up, his protective instincts kicking in. "Anna, sweetie," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Why don't you come sit with me for a bit?" Anna looked at Paolo, her eyes wide and questioning, before taking Lucas's hand and allowing him to lead her toward the front of the cabin. Paolo watched them go, a heavy sense of loss settling in his chest. He had hoped for a bridge between him and Anna, but all he felt was the widening distance. As Paolo stood there, feeling the weight of the moment, a flight attendant approached him. Her face was serious but kind. "Sir," she said quietly, glancing toward Anna and Lucas, "there's something you should know." Paolo turned to her, confused. "What is it?" "Anna is adopted," the attendant explained, her voice gentle. "Lucas is her father, and they've built a beautiful life together. I thought you should know." Paolo's breath caught in his throat. "Adopted?" he echoed, the revelation crashing over him like a wave. "I didn't know. I thought—" He couldn't finish the sentence, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. The attendant softened her tone. "Lucas has always encouraged Anna to learn about her biological father. He's known about you and supports Anna's curiosity. This is a sensitive topic for all of them, especially given everything that's happening." Paolo felt the world tilt beneath him. His absence, the lost years, and now this revelation. All of it swirling together into a storm of emotions. "Is she happy?" he asked, his voice trembling. The flight attendant nodded. "Yes, she's very happy. Lucas loves her dearly, and Anna adores him. But she's also curious about you. This could be a chance for you all to navigate this together." Paolo turned to look at Anna. She was sitting with Lucas, laughing at something he had said, her smile bright and carefree. It was a sight that stirred something deep within him. He realized then that he wasn't an intruder. He didn't need to replace anyone in Anna's life. He could simply be another part of it. The storm outside raged on, but inside Paolo, there was a shift. He felt a glimmer of hope, fragile but real. Maybe this unexpected reunion could lead to healing, not just for him, but for Anna, Clara, and even Lucas. The flight attendants began preparing the cabin for landing, and Paolo returned to his seat, his mind racing with possibilities. He had a chance, a real chance, to be part of Anna's life. He wasn't there to take anything away from Lucas. He wanted to enrich Anna's world, to be someone she could rely on, even if it was only a small part of her life. As the plane began its final descent, Paolo's heart raced with anticipation, but this time, it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was hope, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way back into his daughter's life. And we've reached the end of another beautiful story. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment saying, "I liked it," so we can bring more videos like this one. Big hug, and see you in our next video.